the topic, the unit that we're going to be going over is all about my family. And the sub theme with that is writing our own stories, telling stories about our families. This is going to build on the previous unit that we had been working on. It's the All About Me unit. That's where they started, and this will be kind of like the second unit within the school year, so that we can just keep expanding and developing the safety and the trust and sharing about their lives. And so this is a pre-K classroom, and these children are developmentally disabled. So even though they may be 3 and 4 years old, they might be actually emotionally or intellectually more like 2 or 3 years old, something like that. I'm not sure exactly. Developmentally disabled is like it's a label that is kind of given. I don't know how to say label. It's like we don't really know what's going on yet. They're too young to have built up any real definition of what's really going on. So just kind of planning for everything. There's kind of a gamut, like with any class, the lower achievement to the higher achievement. So I tried to cover all that. And also like 2 to 4 weeks, and just depending on the COVID reentry plan for everybody, because I don't know what's happening with that. And so I tried to incorporate some technology in there as well. So New Mexico, so because it's pre-K, that we're not using the Common Core content standards, we're using the New Mexico Early Learning Guidelines, which include things like social and emotional learning, literacy, physical, skills, music, art, science, social studies. And so when we're looking at that, I was looking at domain 2, which is literacy. We want them to engage in activities that promote emergent reading and writing skills, experiment with some tools and materials and surfaces, and increase their attempts to represent meaningful words in print in the environment using early stages of writing. I was also looking at domain 6, so a little bit more content driven, self, family, and community. And so the goals are for them to exhibit some self-awareness, and then also be able to express, not just receive cultural influence, but express their own cultural influences from home, a neighborhood, or community. They work, and then for goals for them to start working cooperatively with other children and adults, and also play and interact with other children and share their experiences and ideas with each other. So the WIDA, or the early English language development standards, I focused on social studies because it was very similar to the early learning guidelines. So children at all levels of English language development apply their knowledge about their family members. So these children would probably be at about a level 1 entering, but who knows, we could have children at a higher level as well. I'm not sure. But basically, linguistically, they'd be focusing on words and short formulaic phrases, one-word utterances to convey an entire message or idea, like the word family. So their language usage would be single words associated with daily routines and familiar stories. So we're tying in their home life. And then the receptive part would be, I went up to level 3 developing, just to give some range. So that is a little bit more complex. I'd be talking phrases with a few familiar, like 3-word sentences, and approximations of a single idea. So then their usage of the language would be familiar phrases, short repetitive language patterns, and I meant to highlight stories. And then just the general vocabulary associated with those environments. And then I also wanted to make sure to make a note that I would definitely be making sure to look into all the IEP goals and accommodations that are on their IEPs already. So the content of objectives in just very simple language for young children is, I know what a family is. I know who my family is. I know who my friends are, and I can write stories about my family. So the vocabulary that they're going to be looking at learning is things like family, and there was only 2 that I could find cognates of, familia, and then of course all the other names of family members. But then I also incorporated some things like a meal in there, possibly a celebration, celebrar, and holiday or special occasions. Sometimes those are things that children remember at this age that they do with their families. And of course, that's going to depend on the appropriateness of each culture, depending on which culture the children have. So not exposing children to something that's not appropriate for them, and also making sure that we're covering all the different cultures in the room. So I will be assessing their use of vocabulary consistently through the observations. And so formative, meaning consistent observations and using the checklists. And then summative, meaning like, well, I'll explain that later. But after teaching, both before and then after teaching and providing practice with its use. So I want to build their background knowledge. So I'm going to talk to them about families at breakfast. We're going to use the words beginning, middle, and end, because we're talking about writing stories. And then also I can incorporate breakfast as a meal. Then we meet in morning circle, and we're going to review what we talked about a little bit with the All About Me unit, and then start expanding and introducing about the All About Me, my family content concepts, visually and verbally. And how I would do that is I would read them the families in many cultures. And actually, there's a link down here at the bottom. I'm not going to go through it because it's going to take too long. But families in many cultures. So if I'm not able to read it to them myself, then I do a read aloud with it. Then I'll link that because it's already there and the book is already there, and it's a pretty good reading of the story. And then I would provide opportunity for predictions, like what do you think is going to happen next? Then I would start asking them yes or no questions. So I'd start with the yes or no questions. Do you have a family? And of course, probably most everybody would say yes. There might be children that may not have their family, so I want to be sensitive to that. They may be adopted, or maybe not adopted, but in foster care or something like that. Maybe even be homeless. We don't know. So then I would assess their background knowledge and clarify some concepts and vocabulary that they may already know or not know. Then I would add that would move into the asking the forced choice questions. So, just they can give me one or two answers. And then start asking some open-ended questions, like what is your family like? I might save some of those depending on how it's going for the shared reading part. Sorry, it's covered a little bit there, but I'm going to also be modeling some reading strategies for them, like directionality and yes. So then when it comes to the shared reading, so I'm going to have some visual cards already pre-made, because I wasn't quite sure how to teach them beginning, middle, and end. Like I was like, maybe I put my hand in front and say beginning and then middle and then end, but it seems like it's too abstract for that concrete level of thinking. So I found some beginning, middle, and end cards where it shows a seed, and then the seed is growing into a sprout, and then the the sprout has become a flower. And so if I can explain that to them, we'll use these cards when we're talking, when we're reviewing. I'll use a different set every day so that they have multiple sets to use, because I want them to be able to also explain the beginning, middle, and end as well. So basically the visual cue cards, excuse me. Then I have another book. Instead of using the same book as before, I wanted to use this other one because it was a little bit better. And it also introduces a family tree. So that way I can tell them that we're going to be writing our own class book about our family trees, just like we did with our All About Me class book. And so we'll be writing an All About Our Families class book as well. And so they're going to be using those cards to help them talk about or write. They're not going to be able to probably write beginning, middle, and end of a story, but I could scribe it for them. So I want to make sure that they're talking about and helping me understand some things about their families, so that we can start getting a handle on what kind of stories they could write with a beginning, middle, and end, and refer back to that. So I want to make sure that I'm connecting it to their personal lives, their backgrounds, their cultures, and their languages. Make sure that students who are English language learners also can access the information. So also assessing to make sure that they understand. So let's see. This is a rubric that's something that I could use right there just to sort of assess, some of these skills and literacy. And then so I'm going to explain the center's assignments, and I'm going to have to explain them like every day. I'm going to start out kind of with few centers. So by the second unit, we'll be able to add another center on. So I think I'll model how they use each of them. Like, so the art, I'll show them my painting of a tree, just the tree, and it'll be similar to this, or maybe I'll just show them this. And then previously, when we did a unit on All About Me, so I'll copy the pictures that they had brought in with their All About Me unit, so that we can use those and put them on their trees, because those are going to be part of the book. So they'll have an illustration of their families, but then they'll have their little story of their families, and that'll be on the next page. So then in the dramatic play area, they have a home, kitchen, living room, and they can, talk about their families and act out what's going on in their families, which is one way that they work through, role play is one way that they work through things going on in life, making sense of their life. The block area would have people, cars, animals, and stuff to try to incorporate what's going on in their life. And I'd like them to, and I'm thinking that that's total physical response. So I'm going to be, the other person in the room, I think, will be able to work with them a little bit on that. And then writing, they're going to have a writing area. They're going to use materials and tools, because part of the centers is they have to develop their fine motor skills so that they actually can write. So we want them to use lots of tools and stuff for that. Let's see. I'm going to also model for them during this time just my own really super short story, a beginning, middle, and end, using those visual cue cards. And I'm also going to use this. It's a worksheet for beginning, middle, and end. So that'll kind of help with the organization. They can start learning about organization. I actually have a book that they're going to read. They're going to try to read it with me. And it's very repetitive patterns. So like, my family is fun, or I am, we play, and things like that. So the pictures tell it all. So hopefully they can learn some more concepts about print. So reading directionality, and then like looking at pictures to help you figure out what's going on and what you need. Because sometimes they'll make up stories, or they'll invent what's going on in the picture. So when we're going to do that, but we're also going to do guided writing. And so that's when they'll start attempting to write stories about their families, and I'll help them. And they'll use the vocabulary. This is an opportunity for me to go ahead and do mini lessons, give them feedback, work on clarification, or directly target intervention. And then I'll make sure to refer them to the word walls on the wall for both the vocabulary and the pictures that match. For the independent reading section, I'm going to have all students doing independent reading at the same time. They'll be in different places in the room. I'll be taking notes. I'll be recording. Oh, I was also, during guided reading, I was recording on my checklist and assessing where they're at and writing anecdotal notes. But the books will be culturally appropriate. There'll be books about families and members of families and various other topics that we've already used. So they're able to read those again. And books that we've created. Here's a couple of suggestions of some books that they could be reading, that we could have in the center. And then I would incorporate going outside, and I'd try to have kids work on beginning, middle, and end in a line. So and I'll use the vocabulary, the terminology. He's at the beginning of the line. She's in the middle of the line. He's at the end of the line. At the end of the day during circle, we would be reviewing some of the concepts and the vocabulary, and we would be doing this every day for either 2 to 4 weeks, depending on if I'm seeing them every day or every other day or whatever. And then I would be taking photos of all their work and making sure to send it home, maybe posting it or sending a letter, putting in their student portfolio. And then there's my works cited.